Hello, the world. This is They Will Kill a True Crime Podcast. I'm Sadiac.
And I am Courtney-iac.
And it's Courtney's night. I hear it's a really gnarly one.
It's very sad. This case is crazy and sad, and it took place in South Korea, so I'm just going to go ahead and apologize in advance for anything I get wrong. I tried to write everything down phonetically so that I won't get anything wrong, but I can't make any promises, and I've definitely researched how to say these names. So, enough of that, but this is the unbelievably sad case of the missing frog boys. So this case takes place in Daegu, South Korea on March 26th, 1991, which was a public holiday. They also had the first public election in 30 years coming up, so everyone was preoccupied with how it would turn out, and it was all anyone could talk about.
The first public election in 30 years.
In 30 years. Big
Wow.
turning point for the country.
Right.
Yes. 13-year-old Woo Chie-won, 12-year-old Cho Ho-young, 11-year-old Kim Yong-gyu, and 12-year-old Park Chan-in and 9-year-old Kim Jong-sik were the absolute best of friends, and one of their fathers described them as, quote, closer than brothers.
That's too many boys.
5 of them.
No.
They all lived in the same neighborhood with their houses arranged in a circle so they could literally walk outside and be together, and so they hung out constantly.
Oh, I want that in my life.
It's so adorable that I cannot take this story. I am so sorry in advance for the story, you guys. On the day in question, the 5 musketeers, as they were sometimes called, met up and set off for a day of fun together. Woo Jong-yu was Woo Chial's father and said he received a call from his son's Taekwondo academy inquiring about Woo Chial because he hadn't shown up for his lessons that afternoon. He set off to his neighbors' homes as all of the boys took Taekwondo together and quickly learned that none of their sons had attended their class that afternoon, and all 5 boys were missing.
No.
The parents questioned other kids in the neighborhood, and one of the friends of the boys said that he had seen them earlier that day and said they had set off to collect salamander eggs. So the parents knew they would have gone to Mount Warrion, which is a mountain range behind the local high school. So the parents set off together to search for their sons, assuming they had gotten lost or lost track of time together. They searched well into the night, and when there was absolutely no sign of the boys, they filed a police report.
I just can't imagine. Salamander eggs, Court.
5 boys. They're just like, what? Your kid's gone too? Like, what is happening?
No. You remember that I have 2 boys and that I have raised, right? Like, what are you doing to me?
Yeah, well, get ready, because this story is like beyond your worst nightmare times 4,000.
Oh, Lord.
Some of the boys were their family's only children. Shan Yin's father, Park, said, quote, in some ways, we were dependent on him. He never gave us any trouble, and he was almost too sincere. Kim was also, quote, very close to his only son, Yong-gyu. Quote, we tried to give him all the love he deserved, and he loved us back, he said. He was very bright and cheerful. He had a great personality. Quote, my son came back to get a thicker jacket, recalled another father, Woo. Quote, I asked him where he was going, but he never really answered. He just said he was going to play outside. The police, in all of their infinite wisdom, assumed the 5 very young boys were simply runaways and encouraged the parents to wait and see if they came home.
No.
Yep. They reassured the parents that their 5 missing children had simply lost track of time and would eventually return home, so they should go about their days and they would be home soon enough.
No. 5.
There are 5 missing boys under the age of 13, and they were like, it's fine. They'll come back. They just lost track of time.
Wow.
Yep.
It should be a national emergency, right? Like 5 missing boys.
Yes.
We need to
all
shut
hands
the
on
world
deck.
down.
Yes.
Oh.
All hands on deck. Like, nobody sleeps. Nothing happens until we find these 5 boys. Young-Yu's father said he had a dream, quote, "It was pouring. My son was right outside the door. He peeked inside, but without a word, he was gone. I ran after him, calling his name, but he wouldn't even turn to look back." 2 entire days went by with no sign of the boys, and word started to spread around the community that 5 boys had gone out to play and had vanished without a trace.
2 days.
Sadie, it's this. There are no words for this case. It just gets so much worse.
I mean, I cannot handle not knowing where my kid is for 2 minutes.
No.
2 days?
2 entire
5
days.
boys just are gone, and it's like, oh well.
Yep.
They'll come back once they figure out what time it is.
Yep. A week later, the case was all over the news in the entire country, and news reports claimed that they had been catching frogs, and so the 5 boys were given the nickname the Frog Boys. People wondered if they had simply gotten lost and were stuck somewhere and unable to return home, or if something unimaginable had happened to them.
But they're searching now for them, correct?
Kinda.
Oh, God.
Barely. Not really.
Courtney.
No, I know. 3 days after the Frog Boys went missing, the Kim family received a call from a man that they didn't recognize. He claimed that he had the boys and said, quote, "I have the boys. They are all suffering and 2 are very ill." Mr. Kim went with the other parents and the police to the Daegu station where the caller had instructed them to go with a ransom. They waited for an hour for the kidnapper to appear, but no one ever arrived. It was later confirmed that the phone call had been a prank call and there was no kidnapper after all. Despite the amount of time that had passed and the false kidnapping call, the police continued to insist that the 5 boys had simply run away.
I'm going to freak out.
I know. It's a big old freak out. This is grounds for freak out. Later, the chairman of the National Organization of Missing Children claimed that the police never really actively investigated the case, which is absolutely mind-boggling. Once the media started reporting widely about the boys' disappearances, the police did start to make slightly more of an effort to look into it, but not nearly to the extent that they should have, considering 5 young boys were missing.
So, what year are we again?
1991.
This whole time I was thinking we were like in the 60s.
No. This is like a modern story.
91.
This is a modern story. I mean, to us, because we were born in the 80s.
Right.
So this feels very, recently enough
Right.
that there's no excuse.
Wow. Okay. And I don't know enough about South Korea. Like, is this how it is?
We'll get into it a
90s?
little bit more. Yeah, they were definitely behind the times, and I think under the regime that they were under at the time, there was a lot of like sort of fear and restriction and stuff. So, police were less likely to get involved in something like this. But regardless, it's 5 little children, little boys are missing. And they just didn't want to deal with it. They just could not be bothered.
Wow. I cannot imagine.
No. The parents were absolutely fucking frantic.
Oh, I can't imagine. No.
So the 5 parents appeared on a show called The Square of Public Opinions, where they clearly expressed their frustration with the police and their total lack of attention to their sons' disappearances. Park Chan-in's father said that it was clear to him that the police were only interested in closing the case as quickly as possible and were avoiding a full investigation, as that would have likely led to months or years of work.
God forbid.
Right? During the program, a phone call came in live on air, and Kim Yong-sik's mother claimed it was her son's voice on the call, which elated the parents and viewers of the show. Their excitement wouldn't last long, however, as that call was also verified to be a prank.
What is wrong with people?
Yeah. There is a very, you will get into hell, and they're like, door number 1, people who prank the victims of missing and murdered children or individuals in general. Right this way, straight into the worst part of hell for you.
And it happens all the time. Like every story we cover, I feel like there's some sort of prank going on for these victims.
Yeah, especially when they're missing and you give them that false hope. God, that's so They're like, we have built a new hell that is beyond hell for you because there is not enough hell in hell for people like you, because that is
Yeah.
just truly awful. Regardless, the public outcry was strong after the show aired, and so police did become more active in the case as a result. Roh Tae-woo, the president of South Korea at the time, finally ordered an official search of Mount Hwaryong, and 300,000 police and volunteers descended upon the mountain to search, and officials created a special unit that was specifically dedicated to just searching for the missing boys. Finally.
But like, okay.
Yeah.
Too late.
We're way too late. Way too late. These boys are gone. They're dead. Evidence is destroyed. It is way too late. There was also a reward issued for 42 million won, or $35,000, for the safe return of the 5 boys. This reward was collected by local schools and civic organizations, just in case you thought the authorities did something helpful. Searches of Mount Hwaryong lasted for more than a year, and the volunteers and authorities would ascend the mountain in lines and beat down the tall grass along their paths, looking for any sign of the frog boys. Despite the massive effort, not one clue about the boys' whereabouts was ever uncovered, and after a couple of years, interest in the case fizzled and the country moved on, leaving the families devastated and hopeless.
How do you just completely lose 5 boys?
That is a very, very excellent question. Even in a country that's not trying that hard to find these boys, like, you still, there's something,
Right. Somebody saw
something.
saw something, or
there's a piece of evidence, or there's a something. I guess that by the end there was like 500 like false leads that ended up coming through, but still nothing. Quote, the police looked for any evidence they could find, but by then there was just no point in searching because there were no traces left. The police were just following orders, so they pretended to do something, said one of the fathers. We, the parents, meant nothing to them. Without the support of authorities, all 5 fathers of the boys quit their jobs and made the search for their sons their full-time focus.
Wow.
Yep.
How?
They spent... I don't know.
Wow.
I don't know. They spent their time they all went into like extreme debt. I do know that.
Yeah,
but,
right.
Yeah. They spent their time passing out pamphlets, questioning people, and driving a rented truck around the entire country with a billboard on the side that had photos of the boys and the words, quote, please help find our missing boys, printed below. The only person who didn't abandon their cause was the chairman of the National Organization of Missing Children, who was quoted saying, quote, Young-Gyu's father looked pale and his face was turning blue. He was hooked on sleeping tablets. We realized that even this strong man was losing his health after a while. Seeing the fathers become weaker like that, I couldn't turn my back on them. The father said he couldn't fall asleep because he was thinking of his son. Quote, I was scared that I may encounter my son in my dreams. I felt hopeless as a parent, he said. I couldn't see the point in living anymore.
Oh my God, Courtney.
We're not done, Sadie. We're not done.
My heart is so broken.
I know. During media events that were held to try to keep attention on the missing boys, the chairman noticed some strange men in the audience, as well as some suspicious men who were well dressed and always stood in the back of the room. He finally spoke to one of the men, who gave him his business card, which was simply a name and a phone number, but no other identifying information like a business name or address. He would later learn that the men were from an intelligence agency, and they claimed to be protecting the families, but it seemed that their presence was much more sinister, and they were looking for evidence that the families were responsible for the boys' disappearances.
You're kidding me.
Nope. They followed the families constantly, knew their schedules, and would sometimes go to their homes.
No.
Quote, they even sent people to our homes and reported everything to their bosses.
Oh my God.
Who on earth treats the parents of missing children like this? Instead of suspecting us, they should have been searching for the kids.
What
Park
is
said.
happening?
Yep. What they did to us was absurd.
Like, okay, so it's one thing for one family to like whatever, they kill their child.
Yep.
It would be a whole other thing to somehow put together 5 families that are willing to, for whatever reason,
Kill
disappear.
all 5 of their children.
Like, what are you thinking?
Yeah.
This is just.
Yep.
I gotta go. I can't anymore.
So
Court.
sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But I'm sure you can
It's
understand
true.
why I had to cover
Right.
this case.
Yes.
WTF, you guys. Like,
Wow.
what is this case? It's crazy. I've never heard of anything like it. 5
Right.
children at one time go completely missing. The police cannot be bothered. And then basically stalk the families after they do nothing. They're
No.
like, oh, let's get something on them. No, just go out and find the killers. These parents had nothing to do with it.
Right.
After 3 years, the public and media had completely lost interest in the case, and the fathers felt like they weren't getting any closer to finding their sons, so knew they had to go back to work to provide for their families while they hoped for a miracle. 2 years later, a psychologist from the United States named Kim Gar-won claimed he had studied the case extensively and knew where the boys were. He said that they were buried in the backyard of Young-sik's home and claimed that his father was responsible for their disappearance because he was the only one who didn't have a solid alibi for the 3 hours after the boys went missing.
Stop it.
I'm so aware this is happening. The other parents were very skeptical, but there weren't really any criminal psychologists in South Korea at the time, so the parents were more swayed by his assertions than they would have been otherwise. Which again, this is part of the problem. There wasn't criminal psychologists, there weren't forensics really at the time. They didn't have a real system for like follow up with forensic teams. Like the police, didn't have proper training for forensics. None of that existed in South Korea in 1991. So, desperate for any answers, they insisted on digging up the yard while the media filmed, but of course found nothing because it would be real fucking hard to kill your son and his 4 friends and then successfully bury them in your backyard in under 3 hours.
Seriously, surrounded by concerned parents of the children that you just killed.
Yep. Yes. That's not something that would have happened, but yeah. And I guess like the filming of the digging of the yard, like the father was just like wailing beside himself. He was just so devastated. They ruined his house. He was like under suspicion. All of the stress of all of these years of not knowing where his son was. He ended up like running off because he was so distraught by what happened. It was just fucking terrible.
No, I just can't handle it.
Tragically, Young-sik's father died of cancer 5 years later, and just 1 year after that, 11 years after 5 boys vanished into thin air, on September 26, 2002, hikers on Mount Waryong stumbled upon shoes and clothing that looked like they belonged to children.
No.
Soon after, they made a truly gruesome discovery when they came across some human bones. Authorities were called in and 5 sets of remains were uncovered, but the bones were massively deteriorated, so it was impossible to confirm the identities of the remains or the true cause of death, but it was presumed that they were the 5 boys who had gone missing on the mountain a decade earlier. The families were able to positively identify the clothing and a set of dental braces, and they did, in fact, belong to their sons, so they were positive that the remains were their missing children. Quote, "My vision became blurry and I started to cry. It was hard to believe that my son was buried here, but I had to," one of the fathers said. Quote, "About 30 minutes later, we all became quiet. I realized that my relationship with my son was over." Quote, "We were filled with guilt. It was so depressing to realize what worthless parents we were," said Kim. We were unable to relieve the spirits of our children."
Oh, that's so sad.
Yep. Yes. One of the boys' sweaters was knotted in a way that would have been impossible for him to do by himself. and his pants and shoes were also found, quote, flipped up over his shoulders, which I don't entirely know what that means, but the sweater, I did see a photo, his sleeves were like knotted together, so he wouldn't have been able to do it himself without, like taking the sweater off.
Right. But
Another
the
bizarre
sweater was still like they
on him.
Okay.
Yep. Another bizarre detail was that a used bullet casing and 3 unused bullets were found when they unknotted the sleeve.
Whoa.
They fell out. Yeah. Police called in forensic experts, and one of the experts on the scene reported that he witnessed police making numerous mistakes in handling the remains and evidence. They didn't block off the surrounding area, and they grouped the bones together in ways that didn't make any sense.
Oh, God.
Quote, when the parents arrived, there was already a group of people who had gathered to see the bodies.
No.
Remembered Wu, who was one of the fathers.
No.
Quote, the police were organizing the long bones and skulls together, which was ridiculous. An expert would have arranged the bones together as one complete body.
Right.
So for around 2 or 3 hours, the police were making many mistakes.
Why?
Kim, who had, quote, already cried so much by then, said, quote, how dare they treat the bones like this, arranging them in piles, then calling us to look at them and ask us whether this is our child or not. We couldn't do anything, so we became angry.
I can't imagine.
I know.
Like, even to bring them to the scene. Like, there's
Yeah.
no reason. Take
No.
pictures of the clothing they found, and
Yep.
that's all.
Yeah.
And
And to
let
get
them-
there and have, like, other people
No.
have gotten there sooner. I don't know if they were, more police or just members of the public or, whoever. But to get there and not be able to just have a fucking moment with your children,
No.
and then to have the police just sort of piling up their bone. Oh, God.
No.
It's
It's
just
so awful.
beyond comprehension. He also said, quote, the police have the law on their side. As parents, we had no power. As a result, it was almost impossible to determine a cause of death. The remains were found huddled together, so initially police determined that the boys had simply died from dehydration and hypothermia, as it had been cold and wet the night they disappeared, and they assumed they'd simply gotten lost and died in the elements. Skeptics and the boys' families disputed this claim, as the mountain is just over a mile from Daegu, so it would have been unlikely that they wouldn't have been able to find help, even if they'd somehow gotten lost. The Korean Alpine Federation, who are experts in mountainous areas and dense forests, came in to assist in the investigation, and the man who led the investigation for the organization said he was completely convinced that the boys had been murdered, despite the police claims that they had simply gotten lost. The area where the boys were found wasn't even 300 feet from the street. And if the boys had been caught in a rainstorm, it would have only taken them 5 minutes to run home.
What?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
No.
No, it's a mountain, but it's not a mountain. They're not on Mount Hood,
Right.
Like,
no. Yes.
they're in town, basically. They're just slightly outside of town,
Well, it also
technically on a mountain.
Seems like this was a place they frequented.
They were there all the time.
Yeah. So they're
Yeah.
not going to just spin around in circles and then realize that, no.
Yeah. No, had they been further up or like on the other side of it or something, I could see. But they were
or 2 years old or something.
Absolutely. But
Right.
they were where they always were, and everyone knew where to look for them because they were there all the time, and all he had to say is salamander eggs, and they're like, okay, we'll go to the mountain. It was like not a thing.
Right. I'm surprised that no one found them sooner.
Well, it seems that their bones were buried. We'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, they weren't out in the open. So from their vantage point, they would have been able to see and hear the city, so it was highly unlikely that they were lost if they indeed died from exposure where the remains were found. They also spent a lot of time in the area, like we just covered, so would have had no problem finding their way home, especially considering there were 5 of them to help
Right.
problem solve. You know, the oldest was 13 years old. He's old enough. They're all old enough. The youngest was 9, which is young, but not so young that he wouldn't have known how to get home.
Yeah, my 7-year-old, almost 8-year-old
Oh
would
my God.
absolutely be able to figure out how to get to a road 300 meters away or feet
Yeah.
or however long.
Feet. It was
Like,
300 feet. Yes.
right? Yeah, no, he's fully capable.
Yeah, I can put your kid in a car and he can get me to Indianapolis, like, with
No
by
problem.
memory. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. It also seems that their bones were buried, like I just said. So, quote, when a corpse is on top of the dirt, it rots or animals come up and rip up the body, which means the bones would have been separated, said the head of the forensics team. However, the bones were all buried, which means that someone killed them and meticulously hid them, so we need to figure out why, and we couldn't. Also, you know, people searched the mountain a bazillion times, so had they been out in the elements, they would have been found immediately.
Right.
The parents would have found them immediately.
Right.
You know? Upon further investigation, there was evidence of trauma found. Big surprise.
Right.
One of the boys' skulls had holes on either side, and 3 of the other boys had marks on their skulls that it was later determined were likely made with metal objects, quote, possibly a tool of some kind. Soil analysis of the area under where the boys were found showed that they had died in the location where their remains were found, but the parents believed that they were murdered elsewhere and then relocated to the area where they were found. Otherwise, they would have been found during the many intensive searches of the mountain. But forensics team said that they were buried, so I think they were buried. It seems like the consensus is that they were buried. 3 other empty bullet shells were located near the remains, but authorities claimed that they were not related to the boys' murders. There was a military base located about 1,000 feet from the area, so police claimed the shells must have come from their shooting range, and there were reports that an officer had emptied his gun of its bullets in the area by firing off a round. That officer was never identified.
Weird.
Yeah. He's like, I just wanted to waste the rest of my bullets, so just fired off a round. One of the boys' friends had claimed that the day the boys went missing, he heard a gunshot followed by a scream coming from the mountain, and he stuck to his story over the years, but no investigation to the claim was ever made. And he told them that in the beginning.
Was this military base there the whole time?
Yes.
Okay.
So, of course, there are several theories about what happened to the 5 boys who went looking for frogs and never returned home. One of the most widespread theories is that the military had something to do with their deaths, as there was a military base so close to where they were found, and the military bullet casings were found near their bodies. That was confirmed that those were military bullets. Did an officer accidentally shoot one of the boys and then kill the others to cover it up? An accidental shooting seems unlikely, though, because even though one of the boys had holes on either side of his skull, there were no bone fractures, which is a telltale sign that the injury was made by a bullet. The police never investigated members of the military, despite rumors swirling about their involvement for years. And if you look up, like on Reddit, or you go anywhere and read about, everyone is convinced that it was the military. And there is a Netflix special or a documentary on this that I was planning to watch, but then got food poisoning, so that set me back quite a bit. But I did read that in that documentary, the military said a lot of very strange things to the family, including something about how they believed that the family would be given magical powers to learn who had killed their children.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's weird.
Yeah,
It's fucking strange.
Yeah.
But it does make sense that somebody from the military... So on the day, it was a national holiday. So one of the arguments is that nobody was there shooting, but commissioned officers could go to the range and shoot on their off time. Mm-hmm. So there is a chance that a commissioned officer had been shooting on the range and had either encountered the boys and accidentally shot one of them or intentionally shot one of them, or, everyone thinks it was the military, though. That's the sort of resounding theory, was that they had something to do with it. especially because the police were so hesitant to investigate.
Right.
So one reporter speculated that the boys were kidnapped by a mentally ill individual, but there isn't really anything to back up the claim. Quote, one child had his clothes turned inside out, which could mean the culprit covered his eyes with the clothes, then murdered the children by hitting their heads with some type of weapon, said the head of the forensics team. Quote, many experts assumed that this was done by a psychopath, and if it were a psychopath, there should have been other cases like this, but there never has been a similar case either before or after. Despite the claim that there hasn't been a similar case, someone on Reddit pointed out that the serial killer, Lee Chun-jae, was convicted in 2019 and confessed to killing around 10 to 15 women and young girls and raping many others between 1986 and 1991. The Frog Boys were murdered just a couple of days before one of his victims was killed just 10 hours away, and he was known to mostly strangle his victims with their own clothes.
Oh.
So, not any boys or men in his repertoire as far as we are aware, but he wasn't that far away, and he was a serial killer. So
Right.
he could have stumbled upon the boys alone in the mountains and decided to just, like, well, here they are. I'm just going to go
Might
for
as
it.
well.
Right. So the families eventually filed a lawsuit against the police department for, quote, having not done their jobs properly by, for example, botching evidence at the crime scene. And the lawyer who filed the case says that there's a huge conspiracy surrounding the case. He thinks that one of the boys was accidentally killed and the 4 others were then killed to cover it up. He said, quote, we had 3 trials and we lost them all. The judges didn't arrive at any verdict that directly pinned the blame on the police. How can that be their final judgment? Quote, the police or the government should have set up a comprehensive police investigation team. They should have tried to find out the cause, whether it involved the military base or not. They should have investigated further. He said it was a, quote, dangerous time during the President Roh's military-backed rule, and power resided with a, quote, rigid hierarchy. So 2 years after the boys were found, the families were finally able to have a funeral for them. Quote, at that moment, I finally realized that it was all real, said Park. The hearse was covered with chrysanthemums. Somebody donated the flowers. I felt very grateful. At least we sent them away properly. Ugh, this part. Quote, the parents took the ashes to the Nakdong River so their children could, quote, float away into the Pacific Ocean. Park added, quote, they died together, so we wanted them to play together in the afterlife. Yup. I'm almost done. The remaining parents of the murdered boys continue to search for answers and say that the police have softened to them over the years, and as their methods have advanced, they've become more sympathetic to the families. Park said, quote, my life is almost over anyway. I've been patient until now. I can wait a little longer to see Jan in. Nothing so far has healed their hurt. Quote, Yang-gyu was a good child, said Kim. Now that her children are all gone, I feel as if the sky is falling and my heart is breaking. Wu wrote something for his son, Chiao-wan, and the other, quote, lovely sons. Quote, it's said that when your parents die, you bury them in the ground, but when your children die, you bury them in your heart, he said. Quote, I thought I could forget you after seeing you return to dust, but I miss you even more as time goes by.
Ew.
Yep. And that, my darling listeners, I'm so sorry to report, is the unbelievably sad case of the missing Frog Boys. I hate cold cases, and I hate this one most of all, but I just couldn't not do it because WT heck, what the fuck happened to those boys?
I don't.
And why do some families have to be tortured like that?
Oh my God. I just like, what the,
Yeah.
what?
It's inconceivable.
Ugh. Why?
Yep. 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 So it seems most likely that there was some sort of something involving the military or some horrible accident gone wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the
Yeah.
military makes the most sense because it would have had to have been like a group of people that found the boys and roughed them up and something bad happened. But if there's multiple people and they're not in the military, they would have been caught, in my opinion. Right?
Yeah.
Like somebody would have said
talked.
something.
Yes.
Yep. But if it's military, it'd be a hell of a lot easier to cover it up. And it would also explain why the police were like, it's fine, they just ran away. We're just going to like stall until all evidence has been destroyed and there's nothing we can do and it's too late. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to be able to dig a grave quick enough and
Yep.
to be able to, it seems like even though enough time passed, like plenty of time, but, still, it would have taken a lot of work
yeah.
to dispose of all the boys and
Yeah, tons of work. It would have taken a concerted effort, and if the police are walking people past this area, like a police person knows to look for a grave of 5 boys huddled together. Like you would see that. Like you would know, even if you don't have like an incredible forensics team, you would know
the ground is cleared.
Yes.
Right.
But if you're purposefully walking by it over and over and over again and probably just trampling over it and bringing everybody through it so that it's like now it's not recognizable, what a perfect way to cover up a mass grave by bringing like 300,000 volunteers, military and police people came through the area over a year. So
yeah, and they seemed like well-behaved boys that probably would have listened to an adult anyway.
Yep.
But it would also, because they weren't necessarily shot that we know of,
right,
it would have also been hard to corral, like once the boys knew what was happening.
Yeah.
To keep all 5 of them together under control would have been really hard to, I imagine.
Yeah, unless there was more than one adult, most likely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. I also wonder I can't imagine it was super easy to get a gun in South Korea in 1991. I don't know that for sure, but it doesn't seem likely that some random stranger, would be able to do exactly that. Like, keep 5 boys under control without a gun, Maybe, I don't know, but.
Oh, I hate it.
Regardless, that actually happened. That actually happened to
Lord.
people. That is a true story. And those 5 boys went missing at the same time. What? That is, I cannot wrap my mind around it.
I have come across that story quite a few times and I always skip over it. And now I know fully why.
Yeah. Well, when I found it, I was like, why have not that many people covered it? And I think one of the things is the pronunciation, but I think another thing is because it's just so sad.
Yeah.
It's just like I've been avoiding it for a very long time. I've had it on my list for a very, very long time, and I've just kept like, but today was the day. So there you have it, guys.
So sorry, everybody.
Yeah.
That Courtney did this to us.
It's retribution for that train story. No, I'm just kidding. It's just a story that needs to be told because it's still not solved.
Yeah, 100%. What do you all think happened? I'm also curious about the holes in the boy's skull. Like, how do you get 2 holes? Like, what would cause that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, unless it was like a hit and then he hit the ground too hard or something. I don't know. Or maybe it was a bullet and it just didn't fracture properly. Or maybe it fractured, but they just couldn't tell because the bones were so deteriorated.
Right.
Who knows? I mean, and maybe they just got there because some dumb police officer like dropped the skull accidentally.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like there's just no way to know at that point. No way to know. So
I'm so sorry for them. We have told some really terrible stories on this podcast, but that one is just right on up at the top.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It's hard, and we keep saying that, but it's like, God, the things that people are capable of are remarkably awful.
Yep.
So thanks for watching. Good luck out there, guys. Good luck with your life now that I've officially ruined it.
Yeah, I'm gonna go cry. Snuggle with my children.
Thanks for watching.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.